I can't see how many people have joined, so I think we might start because we are on time. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we're all meeting. We're all meeting in different places, and welcome. In my case, that's the Guringai people, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge the lived experience in the room, and you'll be meeting some of our fabulous lived experience pathfinders shortly. And in the meantime, I think I've just plunged into darkness, so I'm sorry about that. I will try and turn the lights on in a minute. In the meantime, I would like to also acknowledge anybody who is on the call who has a lived experience of an eating disorder or other mental health issues, and the people who love and care for them. After all, it is why we are here and why we do what we do. So today, this webinar has been prompted by a report that Butterfly has just released called the Community Insights Report. We last did this report at the end of 22. So there's been quite a change in some of the findings since the last report was launched. And we just thought we'd go over some of the findings, and we're going to talk to our panelists about what that means for them in real time, and look at some tips and solutions about some of the issues that we're dealing with. So just a warning, this will naturally, we'll be talking about eating disorders, body image issues, weight stigma, healthcare professionals, and some potentially unhelpful treatment from healthcare professionals, and hospitalisation and barriers to treatment. And as I mentioned, we do have our panellists who have their own lived experience of an eating disorder. And so just take care of yourself. And I will be talking about the helpline number and contact details also, which should be on your screen when we come back, when I finish this presentation, which is going to be short, I promise. Then you should be able to see the number also. So we will do our best to answer your questions. We ask you to put them into the Q&A chat. They will be moderated. We won't have the opportunity to assist with any individual concerns if you're worried about yourself or a loved one. We do have the helpline available for that, but we can't answer personal questions, but we can certainly answer general questions, and would be very much encouraging you to ask questions of specific panelists or general questions, which we can then turn to the panel to answer. So you might want to take a photo of this slide if you need the QR codes for our helpline. That's our helpline number. You also can chat online. We have web chat with live counsellors online. You can also email, which is not live, but a qualified counsellor will get back to you as soon as they can. There is also a brand new screening tool that we've put onto our website, which was part of the recommendations from the Community Insights. So one of the findings that we'll talk about is the very small percentage of people who feel that they can recognise the signs and symptoms of an eating disorder. So the screening tool can help with that. It's not a clinical diagnosis, but it is a validated tool that it's only 6 questions, and you can jump on. It's all anonymous, and click through and get a sense of whether you should perhaps potentially be concerned. So here are our lovely panelists, and I'm going to introduce them shortly. Tonight is an opportunity to gain a greater understanding about eating disorders more broadly, and as I said, to hear directly from individuals who have experienced an eating disorder, as well as our lovely clinician, Sarah, who is our National Helpline Manager. So at Butterfly, along with lived experience, research and evidence underpins everything we do. We use research and data to inform ourselves and our communities about the realities of eating disorders in Australia. And so the Community Insights Report is the foundation of this conversation tonight. It looks at community perceptions on prevalence, presentation and impacts of eating disorders. We also wanted to look at the drivers and barriers to seeking help for an eating disorder, and to understand and target stigma, which we know exists significantly within this space. So before I introduce our panelists, I did just want to run through some of our top level results with you. So some of these we did see in the last report. 1 in 3 people in Australia are dissatisfied with how they look, which is very much of a concern to us. Although eating disorders are not caused by body image issues, body image issues are a significant risk factor to developing an eating disorder. And in fact, they're the highest modifiable risk factor for developing an eating disorder. I mentioned earlier that only 1 in 10 people, in fact, it's 11%, are confident that they can recognise signs and symptoms of an eating disorder, which prompted us to include the screening tool, but also to have this webinar and to talk about some of those signs that you might not know to recognise. 57% of people self-report as having at least one symptom of an eating disorder, which is much higher than the prevalence rates for an eating disorder. But this is self-reports based on a list of clinical symptoms that we developed for the questionnaire, for the community survey. So that's obviously of concern. And there is still quite a lot of stigma around eating disorders. For example, 1 in 5 believe that you can tell by looking at someone that they have an eating disorder. And 2 in 5 hold stigmatizing views about eating disorders, such as that they're a lifestyle choice, a sign of weakness, and people would snap out of it if they wanted to. So let me just come out of this and bring back my screen. Stop sharing, I've just seen it. So I'd like to now ask the panelists to introduce themselves and maybe just say a few words about why you're here. I think I'll start with you, Sarah, if that's okay. So Sarah is our other Butterfly staff member here tonight. So Sarah, I'm going to throw to you.
Thanks, Mel. Yes, I'm a clinical psychologist and manage our Butterfly National Helpline. And as you mentioned, we can support anybody who may experience either a lived experience, a carer, a friend or family member, a professional, or anyone in the community in those areas of eating disorders, body image, or other sort of related concerns. And as we know, eating disorders have a really wide-reaching effect and can create a lot of suffering and a lot of pain for not only the people experiencing them, but their loved ones around them. So I guess I'm very grateful to be part of conversations like this to help just increase community awareness, help break down stigma, and hopefully help encourage people to notice the signs and seek that early support as soon as possible.
That's lovely. Thanks, Sarah. Can I now I'm just going to go around my screen. Can I throw to Melissa, please? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is also Melissa. So I'm 28 years old. I use she, her pronouns, and I am from Albury-Wodonga. I'm a social worker and I currently work as a youth counsellor, which I absolutely love. I'm also a very passionate football fan, gamer, and just an all-round nerd, really. I have a lived experience of an eating disorder and body image issues, which started developing as a young child. I have an official diagnosis of atypical anorexia, along with some other mental health issues, and I live in a large body. I am here tonight to continue to have these conversations and contribute my lived experience and advocate to help challenge perceptions, break down stigma, and promote inclusive care for all bodies.
That's great. Thank you so much, Melissa. Natalie, you're next on my screen.
Yes, hi, good evening. So my name's Natalie. I use she, her pronouns, and I moved from the Barossa Valley in South Australia to Canberra to study policy studies at the Australian National University. So I'm really grateful to be here this evening to share my lived experience of an eating disorder. I spent a lot of years struggling to express what I was going through and to find the proper professional help. And so I'm glad to be involved with the Butterfly Foundation and working on this mission to try and help others identify the signs of disordered eating and find their sort of path to treatment and recovery.
Thanks so much, Natalie. And I'm going to throw to TJ.
Amazing. Thanks, everyone. Hi, my name's Thurindu, or TJ. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm joining from Wurundjeri country in Melbourne, Naarm. I feel really privileged to have an opportunity to be a part of this conversation today, leaning into my lived experience with anorexia and bulimia, I think it's a super important conversation to have, as we've just spoken about, how important it is to acknowledge that there is stigma and barriers and even exclusions to accessing care and equitable support. And I'm really excited to have an opportunity to share kind of my experiences and what that has looked like, particularly from the lens of culture and diversity, and what the experience of having an eating disorder as a young man has looked like for me. And yeah, I think it's great to be able to join this panel to have this chat.
Thanks so much, TJ. So I'm going to kickstart some of the questions. Please do feel free to post your own questions in the chat, and we will get to them as soon as we can. Sarah, I might start with you, because some of the research showed that 9 in 10 people don't recognise signs and symptoms of an eating disorder. What are some of the most sort of top, I know there's a lot, but what are some of the sort of top level signs and symptoms that you might look for in yourself or a loved one?
Yeah, look, it is a really big question, and I think part of the challenge is that eating disorders are, serious, complex mental illnesses and can be potentially life-threatening. And there's actually a lot of different types of eating disorders as well. So the symptoms and signs can vary. Some people might be experiencing more than one eating disorder at the same time as well. A lot of people often hide the signs and symptoms because of that stigma and shame and fear that they might be experiencing. And a lot of people also may not realize that maybe the disordered behavior or thinking around food and eating is actually harmful. There's a lot of messages that get reinforced around society as well. So I think spotting the signs can be challenging for lots of reasons, including those. And there are lots of signs and symptoms. So we'll just try to talk through some of the main ones that people might notice that tend to fall across the broader range of eating disorders rather than specific symptoms. Signs and symptoms, they do tend to fall into either physical categories, behavioural categories, or psychological or emotional categories. And relating to eating disorders, it's often around changes or unusual routines or patterns that seem different to what a person maybe previously was kind of like. And those changes or things tend to fall around areas of eating, food, weight, body shape and size. So some of the most common physical signs can include rapid or significant weight changes. And that's important to know that it can be weight increases as well as loss of weight. And then there can be a lot of different signs that the person might be physically unwell, and that's often due to the changes in their food intake that they might be experiencing. So that can look like faintness, dizziness, tiredness, muscle weakness, or other things like digestive issues. And as I said, there's a lot more, but I'm just trying to focus on a couple of the key ones for this conversation. Some of the most common behavioural signs can include things like really strict or rigid eating or dietary behaviours. So that might look like cutting out entire food groups. It might look like really severe restriction of calorie intake or food intake. There can also be a lot of secretive or avoidant behaviours around food. So that might look like hiding food, or maybe pretending that food's been eaten when it hasn't, or things like avoiding eating around other people, and can also include a lot of extreme or excessive or obsessive kind of behaviours focused around, again, those areas of food, eating, weight, body shape and size. And so that might look like maybe a lot of checking of the body or the appearance in different ways, or it might look like eating food in unusual ways or unusual quantities. I guess the psychological signs can be a bit harder to notice, but some of them might be observed and they might emerge through conversation as well. And that tends to be things like really strong preoccupation or sensitivity, food, fear or anxiety, or really rigid thinking around, again, those key areas of weight, food, eating, appearance and body shape, size as well. And again, because everybody is different, so just because somebody is displaying some of these signs doesn't mean that they're necessarily experiencing an eating disorder. But I think we do encourage people to try to be aware of those possible signs and really trust their instincts if they are feeling concerned about a loved one or someone that they know. Trying to open up just a gentle and caring and non-judgmental conversation just to talk about those concerns, and it just can present that opportunity for a person to maybe be able to share what is going on for them, whether it is signs of an eating disorder or possibly something else.
Thanks, Sarah. That's really helpful, and we'll pick up. Might pick up a bit later on what to do if you're worried about someone that you care for, if you're worried about yourself. I might throw to some of our other panelists now. Melissa, what for you were the signs and symptoms, and were they recognised by your loved ones?
I think for me, a lot of it was kind of either kind of seen as normal or kind of swept under the rug in a way and kind of disguised as health behaviors. I guess being in a larger body, it was very much encouraged to kind of participate in dieting, to lose weight, kind of have them kind of aspects were really quite honed into me because of my body size. So I think a lot of it was kind of, very much not really recognized as potential unhealthy behaviors or kind of risk factors for that, around kind of that stuff. So I think for me, it was quite tricky to identify, I think things that were kind of potentially at risk of an eating disorder.
Thanks, Melissa. And Nat, do you mind if I ask you the same question? Did your family know who picked it up? Was it you? Was it a loved one?
Yeah, so I developed my eating disorder when I moved interstate for university. So my parents weren't around for any of the initial part of my experience at all. It was only when I began treatment that they actually became aware of anything at all, just because of that physical distance. But for me, it came about during a time of a big transition of moving interstate, of starting university, going to a city where I didn't know anyone, which obviously kind of is in line with what Sarah mentioned before. But basically, I moved into a catered college as well. So all of a sudden, all of my understanding around food and sort of the foods I liked, the foods that sort of scared me a bit, all of these sorts of things were just taken out of my control. And once you sort of started to engage in, particular behaviors, then very quickly I found it sort of spiraling a bit, and then you kind of lose your ability, I think, or at least I found myself losing the ability to get myself out of that situation.
Thank you. And we can talk a little bit more about how you did get yourself out of that situation, because I think that's something that everyone's going to be really interested in. TJ, would you mind sharing a little bit about your story and your experience with your eating disorder?
Yeah, thank you. So I think similar to Natalie, a significant shift in my life was the transition from high school into university, and not having the structure around most of my days and that social connection that I had during high school was a real shock to my system heading into university. And I think a lot of the things underlying this period of time was also, as someone who had migrated to Australia from Sri Lanka when I was very young, most of my life was around trying to fit in, and what that could look like for me as a little boy, recognizing quite clearly that I didn't look like the people that were around me, whether it was in school or in on TV and the media, and going into university, that was kind of like I used that as a time to really shift some of the things, and I could tell that I was leaning into maybe some unhelpful coping mechanisms, or due to this kind of lack of structure that I had moving into uni from high school. I think some of the things that Sarah mentioned as well, this like really intense preoccupation with food and the way that I looked, it took over most of my days. It impacted my studies. I recognized that as someone who was really social and spoke to a lot of my friends during high school, I didn't speak to anyone, no communication with friends. Like I hardly spoke to my family. I found it embarrassing to eat in front of other people as well. And as in the Sri Lankan culture, and for me, I speak only from my experience, but a lot of Sri Lankan culture, we show love and care through food, and we share food as a family and as a community. And when I could tell that times that really brought me joy in the past actually had a very strong physical reaction in my body, I knew that something had shifted in my being and in my sense of self. And I really credit and I thank my mother and my sister for I think recognizing some of those signs before I did. I think there were lots of reasons why I didn't reach out for support. And I think as someone who didn't see myself represented in any eating disorder related conversations or eating disorder support services at the time, it kind of felt like I was experiencing something that wasn't meant for me. And I really, credit the persistence of the people around me to seek support.
Thanks, TJ. It's really such an important part of recovery for a lot of people to have family members and loved ones involved. Not for everybody, but we know that can be a really important part of the recovery journey. It's also really interesting. You both talked about, Natalie and TJ both talked about the transition from school to university. We know that is a key period of potential risk, as are other transition periods. Melissa, I'm just interested a little bit more in some of your story. For you, what do you think was the trigger, or was there a specific kind of period that you think contributed to you developing an eating disorder?
Yeah, I would probably trace that my disordered eating and body image issues started probably around 6 years old. It's pretty much as soon as I hit school. I learned at a very early age that my body was different to others, and the world never let me forget it. So I experienced quite a lot of kind of physical and emotional abuse and bullying, not just my whole school life, but also like it felt like I would kind of get it from everywhere. It very much continued to kind of reinforce those messages that I was different and I didn't fit into the world. It really kind of felt like everyone believed they had like a right or an obligation to comment on my body because of being in a larger body. And I think my eating disorder was a combination of a lot of different factors. Like most of us, like all of us, I grew up surrounded by diet culture. But for me, losing weight brought me so much more than like a thin body. Like it would have brought me acceptance, opportunities, respect, just general kindness. And the biggest part about that was actually just kind of safety in the world, which I don't feel very often. I think I've done many different things to try and change my body. I started dieting at a really young age. And it felt like nothing ever worked. And I put the blame on myself. It was very much like it was a personal failure. Like I wasn't strong enough to keep up with this, or I couldn't, I didn't kind of have the strength and motivation to keep losing weight. So I would become very self-critical and feel like a failure for a lot of that aspect. And there was just so much conflicting information about food and weight and exercise in general that I really had just no idea what I was meant to be doing growing up. It felt like people didn't care how you lose the weight as long as you lost the weight, regardless if it was for impacts on your health, disordered eating, developing an eating disorder. Like they just wanted you to lose weight. So kind of as I got older, the kind of discrimination and stigma became a lot more subtle and less obvious to others. Like it wasn't just kind of the kids in school bullying me. It wasn't just people making comments. Like it just society in general really just implied that everywhere I went. Kind of everyone's obsession with weight loss, diet culture, the marketing, movies, social media. not being able to find inclusive clothing. Like, it really was just everywhere. And as someone not living in a larger body, that's some stuff that people don't notice. Like, it's not kind of a day-to-day concern for them. So I think that was really, for me, I just constantly got the message that my body didn't fit into the world and I couldn't lose the weight no matter what I did. And it really just kind of continued developing the really unhealthy patterns of disordered eating and severe body image issues.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. We've just, Sarah heard from Melissa about her experience of what is currently called atypical anorexia, though I know that there are some moves to rename that. We've seen that I think 20% of people think that you can tell if someone has an eating disorder by looking at them. That's 1 in 5. That's a lot of people. Can you comment on that, please?
Yeah, it's I guess really important to highlight that eating disorders don't discriminate. They're not a lifestyle choice. They're absolutely not a sign of weakness or failure, even though it might feel that way for a lot of people. They are a serious mental illness. And I guess regardless of somebody's age, gender, their sexuality, their culture, any other factor or characteristic about them, including their body shape or size, can be at risk of developing an eating disorder. So I think breaking down that stigma is just so important. I think historically the media has portrayed eating disorders in a really narrow and stereotypical way. And unfortunately, that's driven a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of misinformation as well. And that can just further fuel the shame and stigma that people are sort of carrying around with them. The reality is that there's a lot of different types of eating disorders, and they all have different types of presenting symptoms. Some people can experience more than one eating disorder at the same time. Some disorders don't fit neatly into categories. And so the reality is that you absolutely can't tell if somebody is experiencing an eating disorder by looking at them. And we know that using things like weight alone or using outdated measures like BMI, we know that that is not a sole determinant of whether somebody has an eating disorder or not. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions within, professional communities as well as the general community. And in fact, a lot of eating disorders, people who may be of a typical weight or in a higher weight range can experience, virtually any eating disorder. So I think it's just so important that we help raise that community awareness, that people of any shape or size, including people of lower weights, typical weights, people living in larger bodies, may be experiencing an eating disorder and are deserving of that same level of respect and care and access to treatment and support as early as possible so that they can work through that recovery process.
Thanks so much, Sarah. We're getting some really good questions coming through, but before I go to the questions from the audience, I just wanted to keep on the same theme, talking about not being able to tell if someone has an eating disorder by looking at them. From the research, we saw that 10% of people think that eating disorders only impact young women. TJ, obviously that's not the case. I wonder if you would mind talking a little bit about your experience as a male with an eating disorder.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think as I kind of spoke to a little bit earlier, I found it really challenging to see myself represented in any of the conversations around eating disorders. And, I think the common narrative was that boys don't experience this. I remember when I was at camp in high school, and me and my friends, we were all just sat around the couch watching TV, and there was a segment on eating disorders. And one of our teachers walked past and said, "You lot don't have to worry about this. This doesn't impact you." We were just a bunch of guys just watching TV. And I remember this moment in time because I commonly, think back to it thinking, of course, it was so understandable and reasonable for me to think that I wasn't deserving of care or support because these are things that are just commonly spoken about and commonly said. And yeah, I echo what Sarah said around, you know, how we have to really respond to some of the stigma around how and who eating disorders impact. I think for me, there's so much cultural messaging around what a man looks like, what a man does, and I think how that intersects with, like in my culture, what does being a man look like? Generally, it looks like, you know, physical strength, and you don't talk about your feelings, and you don't worry about the way that you look. And to not see yourself represented in the common narrative on something, especially when you already are in a marginalized or oppressed group, you feel like an outsider times 100. And it was really challenging for me not to feel dismissed when I would go to, you know, talk about, you know, the things that I was feeling with a doctor or at a health service, and for it to be dismissed as, you know, you're just a young guy growing up. You know, this is just the general way of life, and, you know, you don't have to stress too much about it. When really it was one of the darkest times of my life, and I really just needed someone to listen deeply to me. And I think about, you know, I commonly get asked a question around, like, why do I talk about this and my own experience? And I realized that if little TJ, when I was younger, had seen or heard a conversation like this, I think his understanding of his experience and also his connection to his body would have been a lot different. And I am really proud of a lot of the conversations that are happening right now when it comes to, you know, acknowledging that, you know, men do experience eating disorders, and there's a range and a diversity of what that experience looks like in practice. And I think at the same time, there's a lot of work for us to do to challenge, you know, the common stereotypes of not only who does eating disorders impact, but also maybe the traditional narrative around what does being a man look like, that generally can be quite harmful to individual and as a collective as well. So there is a, you know, intersecting work to be done there.
Thanks so much, TJ. Yeah, and you touched on the cultural impact as well, which of course is an added layer of stigma and potential difficulty in recognizing and actually acknowledging that an eating disorder. I might just go to one of the questions now that's come up from one of our guests. So Natalie mentioned earlier the transition, and I know we spoke also with TJ about the transition from school to university, and also Natalie, you talked about moving interstate. That also was part of the a trigger for you that that contributed to your eating disorder. The question is, what are the other kinds of risk times in someone's life that can cause an eating disorder? So I know, Sarah, you could answer that one. Did anyone else want to respond to that in terms of transitions? We go to our clin psych. Sarah, let's ask you.
Sure. Look, I think for most mental health issues, there's definitely some key times of vulnerability, and that can include often developmental changes. So as people are moving from childhood into adolescence and then adolescence into adulthood, it's not only the physical changes that are happening, the cognitive changes, the psychological changes. There's so much social change happening at that time. We're kind of moving away from the family as our main influence and turning more and more towards the peers and community and society. And so particularly for eating disorders, all of that really, you know, I would say toxic and harmful messaging around the thin ideal and, you know, muscular ideal, and just all those ways that society tells people that they're not enough, or they should look different or be different, should be this, should be that. It just really fuels, particularly for an eating disorder, those developmental times. But then anytime there is a key transition in life, that can also lead somebody to be vulnerable. So we've heard, you know, there's real experiences of transitioning from, say, high school to university, which I think is another really common transitional time where an eating disorder can emerge. Again, you've got, you know, Natalie talked about just the access to food and lack of control over all those things, and being exposed to different routines, the potential social isolation. But then I think as well, just keeping in mind that, again, an eating disorder can affect people at any age across their life. And so, you know, again, other major life transitions, divorce or separation, or pregnancy, childbirth, you know, illness, grief and loss, sort of trauma, all of those challenges and changes that are often could be part of life, but those can present as really really elevated times of vulnerability for eating disorders to develop, as well as other kind of mental health issues to develop.
Thanks, Sarah. We've also had a question about, and this is a big one, but it's important. How do we challenge healthy lifestyle or fitness trends, and the way that they normalise potentially harmful behaviours or relationships with fitness and food? I'd like to maybe start with Natalie on this one. I know, Melissa, you will also have comments on this, I'm sure. But Nat, maybe we can start with you in terms of, you know, how do we challenge these ideals of what's supposed to be, you know, fitness and health?
Yeah, so a big part of my experience was growing up in an elite sports environment. And so my family were elite athletes. I was participating in sport at least 6 times a week. A lot of very harmful practices by coaches in terms of weight tracking, BMI, all the sort of diets, stuff like that. And I think like something that I ended up actually having to stop exercising for quite a while as I was going through treatment, and it's been something that I've been re-engaging with support recently. And a big part of it for me has been thinking about like the intention behind something and why I'm doing it and how am I feeling in this moment. And so for me, it's become a lot more about how is this making my body feel? And if sort of ideas of I'm doing this, you know, for like this kind of result, or if I start having metrics in mind or things like that, then I just kind of like pause that activity. I think it's not, metrics for me has always been quite a dangerous thing, particularly as someone who can be quite a perfectionist. And so removing all those sense of markers and focusing instead on how it's making me feel and just ensuring that I'm taking a step back from that has been really valuable in distinguishing this phase of my exercise to when I was younger and around that elite sports environment.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Natalie. Melissa, did you want to add anything to that? I do have another question for you also.
Yeah, I guess just briefly, I think one of the biggest impacts around kind of that type of stuff was really kind of the labels of food, particularly that kind of good and bad. I found that very ingrained in me, I guess, from a young age, and it's taken me years and years and years to kind of unlearn and kind of challenges those beliefs, and kind of promote kind of the healthy relationship with food. I think that has been kind of one of the hardest aspects of kind of my treatment is, yeah, really just kind of removing kind of the dieting kind of mindset and relearning that all food is good and there's no label of good and bad, you know. So yeah, I think that was a really kind of big challenge for me, but I've gotten a lot better with it.
Thanks, Melissa. And a kind of a follow-on question from one of our guests is, I noticed that you use living in larger bodies. Could you talk more about this terminology, please? Is it a spectrum where you would also refer to living in smaller bodies? I haven't heard this term before, so would like a better understanding.
I guess for me, that is a comfortable way that I can refer to my body that isn't revolved around the word fat. I think the term fat has been used always negatively towards me, and it is a word that I have seen other people in larger bodies reclaim that, but that is not something that I'm up to yet. Like I said, it's always had a very negative and hurtful association to me. And some people feel comfortable to refer themselves as, you know, living in a fat body, but that is not something that I'm comfortable to do. So I think that's where I really I'm weighing up kind of the way, how do I describe my body in a way that is kind of comfortable for me, but also, you know, the reality of it as well. So I think that is, yeah, I guess that's how I kind of refer to it.
Thanks, Melissa. It's a very personal choice. And
Mhm.
I guess the aim is to get to a position where fat is no longer an insult, but a descriptor. We're not quite there yet within our society. I had a question for you, TJ. So how did you talk about your eating disorder with other males and how did they respond?
That is a very good question. I think it took a lot of thinking and reflection on my part to feel confident and comfortable about it. The way that because it was such a new conversation for me to have with someone that wasn't, you know, my family or a doctor or a health professional. The way that I remember when I first had the conversation with a group of mates, we were talking about, I brought up toxic masculinity, and we were just talking about what that looks like. I think men have a role to play when we're talking about things like this. I use that as a kind of a platform to talk about what being a man looks like, feels like to each of us, and how that had connected to like our upbringing and our history. A lot of us, you know, had particular family relations that impacted the way that we viewed what being a man was. And then that naturally goes into a conversation about what being a man kind of looks like, and then thinking about, well, why do we feel like that? Why is that the case? I am a talker and I like to have a conversation about things. And I think for me, that was like a natural way to have a constructive conversation about what is a really pertinent issue currently around toxic masculinity and what being a man is and could be. And then also using it as a platform to think about, you know, how do we feel about ourselves as men in this current context, and how do we, I guess, do better and do differently as well to show as much respect as we can to ourselves and the people around us. Because I think when we have a positive and a safe connection and relationship to ourselves and our bodies, we show that, you know, to the people around us as well. So that was just one, example of how I'd, had that conversation with a bunch of mates.
Thanks so much, TJ. I think that ties in with Sarah's comment about starting the conversation. And we have had a couple of questions about how do you do that? How do you, if you're concerned about someone, what do you do? How do you get them the support that they need? What's the next step? So I'm going to ask you that, Sarah.
Yeah, sure. And look, it's a really common question and a really common concern that we do hear on our helpline. People, you know, they might be starting to realise either themselves or somebody they know maybe could be experiencing an eating disorder. And I think it's can be very overwhelming. People describe a lot of worry and a lot of anxiety and uncertainty around what to do. I think there's different ways it can be approached. I think one is Butterfly's screening tool, for example, that's on the website. That can be a way that people can just take that first step to try to understand their behaviour and thinking around food in a fairly simple, straightforward way. And then having that kind of a result can be a way to help soften the way to have a conversation, whether that's a conversation with a health professional or with a loved one initially. And I guess with something like a screening tool, you know, it may not be 100% accurate in picking up risk in every single occasion. So if somebody has concerns or questions, you know, still going to talk to their GP or a health professional can be another good starting point. A lot of people, you know, do find that talking can be helpful. I loved hearing, TJ, that you're a talker, and that's been a way you can really use that strength to help other people. It's really beautiful to hear that. So again, you know, whether it's talking to family, close friends, ideally somebody who, you know, is hopefully going to be a safe and non-judgmental person to have those conversations with. Contacting, for example, the Butterfly helpline and speaking with a trained counsellor can be another good first step, just to help maybe understand what might be happening for themselves or the person that they care about. And we also, for example, Butterfly has a national referral database on our website, so that can be a way to identify suitable health professionals in the area or via telehealth. But I think it's, as far as having the conversation itself, it's, it's trying to prepare yourself with information. So going to reputable sites, there's a lot of misinformation out there. So really, being equipped with factual and objective information, trying to approach the person if you're concerned about them just in a, ideally being non-judgmental, curious, caring, not choosing the time, so not jumping on them when they've just walked in the door, but trying to choose a moment where hopefully they might be receptive. And I think just, really approaching it with that curiosity, sharing what you're concerned about, and hopefully that can create that space for them to reflect, because maybe they're not aware that they've been engaging in some of these thinking and behaviours that's actually harmful. And again, I think it was Melissa and, the other panelists as well have just highlighted, just all those messages that we hear from sometimes family and society and community, not always realising that actually we're engaging in some pretty harmful and unhealthy things.
Thanks, Sarah. We have a lot of questions. I mean, there's all fantastic discussion. There's also a lot of resources on Butterfly's website, which include tips for carers and parents and how to have those conversations and kickstarters for those conversations. So if you are concerned, there's the screener, and then there's lots of tips and resources. Along similar vein, Melissa, I think this is one for you. How do you deal with health professionals that don't understand atypical anorexia and are reluctant for the patient to gain weight?
Yes, that was a huge challenge for me. I think I wasn't diagnosed until I was 23. And I think for me, when I heard the term atypical anorexia myself from my psychologist, I remember laughing and being like, that can't be possible. Like, anorexia in a larger body doesn't make sense. So even I had my own internal kind of fat phobia and bias around that. And then to go out there and have to kind of advocate and explain that to health professionals was very exhausting. It was very challenging for that. And I guess, for me, I kind of had a lot of experiences of weight stigma, doctors and professionals just not believing my diagnosis, telling me my eating disorder isn't as serious as someone in a smaller body. So very quite dismissive comments that ultimately I ended up getting sicker because of that. I wasn't able to access treatment and get the help I needed when I asked for it. So for me, a lot of that was around finding people to advocate with me. So to kind of get people in kind of your ball court in a way. I was very lucky to have met my psychologist at the beginning of my treatment, because she advocated for me when I didn't have a voice. So to being able to link in with professionals who already have that understanding, kind of do your research and to see who's out there, who's kind of trained in what support you're after, I think really helped me, like I said, kind of build up a treatment team that kind of helped fight the system that was ultimately against me in that way.
Thanks, Melissa. That's helpful. And it's not just atypical anorexia that people struggle to get help with. I know that less than a quarter of people actually reach out to get the support that they need, which is a bit of a concerning statistic. Nat, I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit, why you found it hard to reach out initially to get support.
Sorry, to be?
Sorry, Natalie. Yeah.
Oh, Natalie.
Yeah, so it took me about 4 years to actually begin treatment from when I identified having disordered eating behavior. A big part of it for me was that idea of there's one narrative of what an eating disorder looks like. This isn't quite fitting my experience, therefore, how dare I kind of use that term or seek treatment for this? I felt like that wasn't something that could be applied to me, and that was sort of, that term would make me a bit of an imposter, really, that it would be disrespectful to other people's sort of suffering and pain, that it was, self-indulgent to think that way. And the reality of that is that that all is part of the disorder sort of preserving itself in a sense. It was almost like I was waiting to hit an absolute crisis point, or like before sort of going, oh, okay, yes, no, that is me. And I think there was just this idea for me of eating and food is such a like fundamentally human thing, and how are you not getting this right? Like, and if you can't get this right, why can't you get anything else right? So as sort of Sarah said at the start, it was very much the idea for me of you know, people should just be able to snap out of it, and like I would never think that of someone else, but it was how I was feeling about myself. So the next part of my journey was really throwing out vague terms to healthcare professionals, like fluctuations in appetite, or like inconsistencies in eating, or like different things. And I was met with a lot of very unhelpful advice, including one psychologist that said some people just aren't meant to eat sugar. And each time over the years that I was sort of faced with these things, it further pushed me away from feeling like I could be, you know, open to treatment. And finally, there was one person that picked up on what I was actually trying to say. And I think like the screening tool is such a fantastic resource. And I did use something similar myself to help kind of validate my experience, and to be able to take that to the professional and go, this is everything that I'm trying to say that I don't have the words to say right now. So I think it's a fantastic resource, and I hope that, you know, it helps many more people.
Thanks, Natalie. I just want to read a comment that one of our guests has said. It's taken a long time for us, but we're finding open and honest works, but agreed timing is key. I told my 18-year-old daughter I was attending this, explained so I can learn and try to understand more. I was not sure how she would be, but appeared she appreciated me making an effort. I'm not great with this, but we're supportive. We're 3 years into this eating disorder. It's horrible, and I wish more people understood. Our parents just say, tell her to eat, which I'm sure we have all heard. We've probably got time. I'm sure we have time for one more, or at least one more. One of the questions we've had is about other eating disorders. So a couple of things, a couple of different questions. Sarah, you mentioned when you were talking about signs and symptoms that weight fluctuation was one of the signs and symptoms. So someone's asking why that's a key symptom when we're saying that it's not necessarily, you know, if we're not looking at anorexia, it may not necessarily be a symptom. And then there's a second question, which is around what are the other eating disorders that you mentioned? It's not anorexia. What are the other kind of most prevalent eating disorders?
Yeah, thanks, Mel. Look, a really good question. I guess one of the most common threads across all the different types of eating disorders is that there's some sort of change or impact on the way the person is approaching food. And so that might be their behavior towards food and eating, their thinking and beliefs around food and eating, and their psychology and other aspects around food and eating. So I guess that's where, because it's the eating and the food behavior that often is being affected, that's why those weight fluctuations can occur across a lot of the different disorders. But again, that can be weight gain. For example, if somebody's engaging in binging behavior, that can result in weight gain, or you know, if people are restricting their food intake for other reasons, again, that can result in weight loss, but not necessarily relating to, say, an anorexia diagnosis. And it's interesting because I would say anorexia is probably the most commonly known eating disorder, but it actually is thought to be one of the least common as far as prevalence does go, but not to detract from anybody who's experiencing any eating disorder. It's, you know, it's a real condition that people are facing. It is thought, though, that the most common eating disorder is what's called unspecified feeding or eating disorder, and that's where the challenges around food and eating are causing clinically significant distress and impacting the person's ability to function, but it doesn't necessarily fit neatly into a box as far as a kind of known diagnosis, or there might not be enough information to make a clearer other diagnosis. The other couple of more common eating disorders are, one is called other specified eating and feeding disorder, and that's where the disorder closely resembles another presentation, like, for example, binge eating disorder or bulimia or anorexia, but it may not quite meet the full diagnostic criteria. And binge eating disorder is thought to be the kind of third most common, followed by bulimia.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I'm aware that we've got 2 minutes to go. I think we could talk about this all night. There's a lot of questions that we haven't got to, and I apologise to the people that we haven't been able to answer their questions. Do feel free to email the helpline, and you will get those questions answered, not in real time, but if you have a real-time issue, you can certainly jump onto web chat and you will be talking to a counsellor directly. And there's also the helpline phone line. And all of those services are available until midnight tonight. So they're 8 a.m. till midnight, 7 days a week. We also do have a referral database on the website, which has health professionals who have been vetted by Butterfly as being knowledgeable and experienced in working with people with eating disorders. And you can filter them by location or by type of health professional, etc. So please do jump on and have a look at those. Again, I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody's questions. There's some really good questions in there. We just have run out of time. I think we could do this at least for another hour. Unless there's anything that anybody else has a burning desire to finish with, I think we've covered a lot tonight. Very grateful to everybody for coming along. Someone was asking about the slides. We can send through the slides if we have your email. I don't know, Kate, do we collect emails from people when they register to attend? I don't know if that's an option.
Might be a Zoe question.
A Zoe question?
Yes, we do have the emails.
Okay, so we can send through the. Sorry, my dogs are just going ballistic. If that's helpful for people, I mean, there weren't very many slides there. The community insights, the full report is also on our website. If you want to have a look at the full report, that infographic, which has the highlights, is also on our website. So thank you so much to everybody for coming, and thank you so much to our panelists. I think all very valuable and personal insights that you've been able to share tonight. So I'm very grateful to our Pathfinders in general, and to you three, and the lovely Sarah also, who is our clinical psychologist and the National Helpline Manager. So thank you, everybody, for coming tonight.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Everyone.